Dabby dude.
Right, come on. There's history there.
Okay, fair enough. Can I call you Alex? Because that's going to be a lot easier.
But Dabby dude.
Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to the iPace Driver Show with myself, Garry Whitaker, the iPace owner, and
myself, but Dabby dude.
And you may see another face who joined us this week, Sam Clarke from Gridserve. And Sam, thanks for joining us. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So I'm going to let Alex kick off the questions, and away you go.
I'm going to start with the first question, which springs to mind, which is, who comes up with the job titles at Gridserve?
Yeah, good question. And the answer to this particular one, and you're referring, I presume, to Chief Vehicle Officer. Would that be right?
Partly Chief Vehicle Officer, but I noticed earlier on there was somebody who's Chief. I can't even remember what it was now, but somebody else had a very, very unusual job title.
Really? Oh, I thought it was just mine. Yeah, the answer to the question, Alex, is myself and the CEO. So he very kindly found a role for me, or we created a role for me, I guess. And so we were trying to think what to call me, and that was the one. It was a bit more wordy, to be honest. It was Chief Vehicle Electrification Officer first, but we just thought that's just too much of a mouthful, so we shortened it down. But it doesn't matter what it is. The point is that my role is electrification of the nation. Whatever we can do to get people in EVs, that's what really matters. The title is superfluous, really.
Indeed. And on that note, I think you're probably well on the way to achieving quite a lot there in terms of electrifying the nation, as you say. I mean, obviously the jewel in the crown, I guess, at the moment is the Braintree site. Would you go along with that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that was our first major install, and still is. We've obviously got a lot more on the way. But yeah, as far as the crown, it's got one big jewel in it, I suppose, at the moment. Well, a few little gems smuttering around.
There's more than the one, let's be honest.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, the image behind Garry is another jewel in that crown, I suppose. So, whether it be the service station or the electric forecourt, we're upgrading everything. But yeah, I guess so. And we're very proud of it. It's the first of its kind in the world, and now we've just got to build another 99 of them, and then we'll be sorted.
Indeed. I mean, that was coming on to the next point. Really is. Obviously, most of our viewers are quite experienced EV drivers, so most of them will have seen the sort of numbers being bandied around. 100 sites in 5 years, is it? 4 years, 5 years? That's quite an ambitious plan. Is it achievable?
Oh, I'd like to think so. I mean, certainly it's not like we came up with that yesterday. There's been years and years of planning in the process. So, for us, it's been a lot longer than that. We've got actually closer to 200 sites earmarked, but ultimately, for a number of different reasons, that will diminish down to a certain number, which will be viable for various reasons, whether it be footfall of traffic on a particular road, the grid connections, the local demographic, the size of the population, if I didn't say that already. So yeah, there's lots of different reasons why we'll get down to that sort of number, I suspect. But yeah, it is ambitious. But Gridserve didn't exist at all a few years ago, and we're pretty well known in the EV world all of a sudden. So if that's not testament to the fact that we move quite quickly, I don't know what is.
Absolutely. I mean, I will be one of the first to put my hand up and say, when I first saw you, I think I first became aware of you when Garry did a little feature about it at Fully Charged Live a couple of years. Was it two? When was that, Garry? 3 years ago?
2 years ago at Silverstone, I believe.
Yeah, at least 2 years.
Time flies. But I must admit that I've watched closely over the time since then, and there were times where I did have a slightly cynical hat on and wonder if it was actually going to happen and be as it was billed. I mean, I felt sure something was going to happen, but the plan seemed so grandiose and so at odds with what we've had up till now in terms of charging infrastructure that I did find myself wondering how realistic it was. But you've got to be pleased with how it's turned out.
Absolutely, and we can't blame you for that thought process either. I mean, how many concept cars have we seen that look nothing like what lands on the road, right? So we're all everyone's guilty of doing it to a certain extent. But I think one thing we're particularly proud of is the last set of digital renders, the flyby digital renders that we showed. are, they're so similar to what we've got in real life. We've actually got real drone footage that follows the digital version, and it's quite hard to tell the difference. Even the lampposts are in the same places as you fly past. So
Yeah.
So from concept to reality, it's quite astonishing how close it is, and that just means that everything that we planned has come into fruition on that site, and so too will it on the other ones as well, because it needs to be a premium service as well as not premium prices, but a premium sort of experience. It's a really, really important thing for us to make sure that it has to be a nice location to go, to understand things, to have a number of different charges available, to be able to get a coffee, to be able to relax. And actually, if you're doing all those other things, then charging in a certain perspective sort of becomes secondary to what you're there for, to enjoy a coffee and chill out for a few minutes before you get back on the road. If we can sort of get the wider audience beyond the iPace owners and everybody else in an EV, to understand what future charging could really be like, then as a collective industry, we'll be onto something, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I've had my iPace for, well, getting on for 2.5 years now, just under 2.5 years. And in that 2.5 years is not a long time in the grand scheme of the world. And I remember being quite excited 2.5 years ago when I got to a charging site with 2 chargers on it. Just explain for the viewers how many chargers you have and what types they are.
So on the jewel in the crown, to use your words,
yes, sorry,
our Braintree site at the moment, we've got 36 chargers all on the same location. That's by virtue of a 5 megawatt grid connection and 6 megawatt hours of battery, which in real terms, that's the equivalent of around, well, just the batteries alone is about 24,000 miles of driving energy at any given time we can distribute into vehicles. So wow. It's not just about the number of chargers, but about the fact that you can charge all of them simultaneously. There is a blend within that 36. So we've got 6 Tesla superchargers, which are version 3, so they're up to 250 kilowatts. Yep. We've got 6 22 kilowatt AC chargers, so that's useful for people that are there for a little while or there all day that are charging on a slower charge, for the 10,000 Renault Zoes out there that don't have DC charging, for a lot of the older generation Teslas that can't use the version 3 CCS connectors. So there's a good reason to have AC. But then I guess the main ticket, the big ticket item, are the 24 DCs under our twinned solar 200 kilowatt peak solar array canopy. How many of that? So 12 of those are up to 90 kilowatts, and they're CHAdeMO and CCS, and then the other 12 are up to 350 kilowatts CCS only, which is faster than anything on the road can currently charge at.
Can they all charge full speed simultaneously?
They will do in the future. The 350s are effectively 175 kilowatts that are twinned, which is what that means. So what that means is that if you are pulling more than 175 on one, it will effectively take some of the energy for the adjacent one if it's available. Now, when we get to the point in which we've got 12 Taycans all are fully empty charging at the same time, that might be a bit of a stretch at the moment, but we're not near that yet. When the time comes to upgrade them, however, we've built the site so that all of those 12 350 kilowatt chargers can be independent 350 kilowatt chargers on their own, independently in the fullness of time, but we haven't put that in just yet for cost reasons, and frankly we don't need to.
I wouldn't imagine so. But even outside of that, then you're saying that you've got 12 chargers that could simultaneously charge at 175 kilowatts.
Yes.
And the other 12 could be charging at 90 kilowatts at that same.
Yes, theoretically, yes, because we've got the grid connection and the batteries to support it. Now the reality is that's almost never going to happen because of charging curves and the fact that if everyone was to turn up at the same time, completely empty, and all plug in at the same time, vehicles that could take it, then yes, in theory, it could deliver it, but that's actually not really going to happen in reality.
All I'm really getting at here is that there's no limiting factor to the charge that people will get. If they turn up, unless 12 people in the Porsche Taycan owners group turn up, if everybody turns up, they're going to get the best charging curve for their car on that day in those conditions, and it won't be limited by the chargers. It would be limited by other factors.
Yeah, and in fact, that's been demonstrated multiple times already, because we did a launch, a part launch with Fully Charged back in December, where we had over 60 EVs on site. Everybody charged perfectly, and obviously not at the same time, so we don't have 60 chargers, but within the 2-3 hours everybody was there. Everybody left fully charged, no pun intended. We've had a number of OEM launches where we've done press days, we've done test drive days. We did one with Polestar recently, and that requires an awful lot of vehicles to be charging at the same time, because everything goes out and goes for a test drive, comes back, charges, goes out for another test drive, and you can't do that anywhere else in the country because there just isn't the facilities to do it. We're kind of used to this in the petrol station world, right? You could do that anywhere, but actually in the EV world, we're the only place you can do that right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a phenomenal facility. I mean, just talk through, for anybody that's been living under a rock for the last year or so, just talk us through sort of the facilities that you have on site and the sort of innovative ideas that you've come up with to make use of those facilities.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think some of it starts before the facilities themselves. So we own a solar farm 44 miles down the road, which is generating 10 megawatts of solar, which is obviously putting the energy into the grid, and then we're sleeving it back out again. So that's one facility, if you like, and also a revenue stream in its own right. That energy is obviously going through the grid and into our batteries, which again is a facility in its own right, because we use that energy to trade, and we put energy into the local households. We take it out. We can harvest our solar energy. We can take in cheap wind energy at night when it's windy but there's no sun, etc. So that in its own right is a function. We've got obviously all the chargers we just talked about, and then the building itself is a 2-story building. Downstairs we have a number of different retail concessions. We've got a tech centre, a post office, a Booth supermarket, a WH Smith, and a Costa, and lots and lots of digital screens, etc. as well. Upstairs we've got 4 bookable meeting pods. We've got showcase space for 2 cars. We have a car lift on the outside of the building, so we can physically put cars into the first floor. We've got an enormous LED wall. I forget the dimensions, but it's got to be 7 foot tall and 20 foot wide or something. And a kids area and a well-being area as well, which is a sort of mini gym. And even that is electric bikes that are connected to the grid. So when you pedal, the energy goes back into the system. So I did a webinar last year on a bike and presenting a 2-hour webinar. And I did half of it whilst on the bike, and I was getting redder and redder as the webinar went on, and more tired, I might add. But I think I put about 75 watts of energy back into the local grid, which roughly translates to about a quarter of a mile of energy in my car. But it's better than wasted in heat, right?
Exactly. I mean, the good thing is little innovations like that. Okay, you generated 75 watts, but I love to see things like that, because it's different approaches. Rather than thinking that hitting it with one big stick is going to solve all the problems, it's lots of little individual things that all combine to make one big thing, and I like that approach.
Did you see our internal combustion engines by any chance? So upstairs we had 2 V8 blocks that have been chromed and turned into coffee tables, which is another nice little touch upstairs, where we're recycling a bit of an old piece of lump of metal and turning it into something a bit more useful.
Yes, something finally making it serve a useful purpose in its life. So I mean, what got you into this? I presume you've got a long-standing association with EVs, have you? Or
just a little bit. I do know. Yeah, I mean, I'm reasonably new. I've only been driving EVs for about 18 years so far. So I do have quite a long history. I've been
trying to think what was around 18 years ago.
Yeah, everybody says that, and things like I don't know if your listeners will even have heard of these, but things like G-Whiz and the Aixam Megavan and the Vectrix motorbike and the Modec van, and these are all sort of products that were around back in the early 2000s, but sadly no longer with us.
I remember the G-Whiz. I used to live in Wapping in London, and there was it was a very early car share company that had G-Whizzes, and I saw them around very occasionally in my area.
Yeah. I mean, they weren't even cars actually; they were quadricycles technically, and only about 20 miles on a lead acid battery. But that's where it all started for me. And then I ran my own last mile delivery company in central London for a decade using a fully electric fleet. So I grew that from 1 van to over 100. and that was great. I had as many electric vans in central London than any other delivery company or anybody for that matter at that time. I'm sure I've been long overtaken now, but back in those days it was a fairly major fleet in London, fully electric. So and that, of course, with that came infrastructure, commercial infrastructure as well, that I had to learn very quickly about how to deliver that as well for my own consumption. So yeah, that hence the history really. And then I was presenting at an event a few years ago about charging infrastructure, funnily enough, and our inspirational leader, Toddington Harper, the CEO of Gridserve, was in the audience, and we reconnected after we've known each other 18 odd years or something, but he kindly asked me to be an advisory board member for Gridserve initially, and I was going through the sale of my company at the time, and then he kindly offered me a full-time role, and I bit his arm off, to be honest, because I've done everything else as far as electric vehicles is concerned, and to have the opportunity just to contribute in any small way to the infrastructure, which is now the big ticket item that needs to be resolved or fixed or improved, or whichever superlative you wish to use. To be part of that journey, I just couldn't resist, really.
That leads us very nicely into the next topic, moving away from the Braintree site, and this will be highly relevant to most of our viewers. Is like you say, there's any number of verbs you could attach to it, but let's talk about fixing the infrastructure. Your motorway service area plans, I think in some ways, and don't take this the wrong way, but in some ways that's almost more exciting to me than the electric forecourt plans, in that it's something we've lived with for quite a while now. It was in its early days, it was a brilliant thing. The whole electric highway network was way ahead of its time. But now, and I'm sure Gary will agree with me on this, and maybe you will yourself, it's kind of fallen behind the curve of what was needed now compared with what was needed then. And it's great to see that Gridserve have taken a hand in that. And now we're looking at quite a significant upgrade, really, aren't we, across the electric highway network?
Yeah, Gary,
yeah, exactly. Move out the way, Gary. You're spoiling the view.
No, not at all. That's our rugby site where we've got 12 350 kilowatt chargers, which is the first one, and utilization figures for that site has been phenomenal as well. So we're really pleased. It's only been open a few weeks, so it's clearly doing its job. Pardon?
All YouTubers.
All YouTubers. Well, yeah. Thank you. I don't care as long as it's being utilised.
Actually, when I was there, I think every single store was occupied, and I was the only YouTuber, so I think.
All right.
No, we're really happy with that collaboration, that partnership. You're absolutely right. It was pioneering. It was cutting edge. At the same time, if I wind my clock back 5 or 6 years, I was procrastinating about a failed charge at the service station like many others, but that is the nature of it. It was designed predominantly for the CHAdeMO and the Nissan fleets to begin with, and it needed upgrading. I think everybody knew that, with the sort of additional impetus of Gridserve, a huge amount of support and backing from Hitachi Capital, and the desire to improve from Ecotricity. It's a great match in order to try and upgrade this network, and it is needed. It isn't just we're doing an awful lot of swapping for new kit, and a lot of that kit, all of that kit, will have a dual charging functionality as well. So we're effectively doubling the network just by changing chargers. We're doubling the network size in terms of connectors that can charge. There's still a huge amount of challenges. I think I said this to Gary before. We're wanting to upgrade a lot of the network as well and put in the sort of infrastructure that you can see at Rugby. We can't do that everywhere, and we certainly can't do it by the end of the year, but there will be a material difference by the end of this year, and then we're also looking to do whatever upgrades we can, be creative with the grid connections that we've got, with the batteries or other solar or whatever we can do to get more power to those locations, and then therefore more chargers, because it is great, but we're always got one eye on the future, and the uptake of EVs will continually increase, and we need, not just us either, there has to be an entire industry-wide contribution to put in the right charges in the right places for when you want to use it. For me, there is very little point in having 15,000 locations around the UK for charging if 10,500 or 12,000 of them are slow chargers or in places you don't want to be, or there's one charger in a really popular spot but you have to wait because someone's always on it. that's not going to work. So some of the numbers we've got out there, some of the statistics, whilst true, ZapMap is fantastic at keeping us up to date on the statistics. But when you drill into the detail, how much of it is really where you want it to be.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of it, to be honest, and that's where the MSAs, motorway service areas, become such an important part of the whole equation, really, because it's what people are familiar with. To really get as many people as we can into EVs, to me, one of the logical ways of doing that is to make them not have to change their modus operandi, if you like, too much from what they've already been doing. Well, as sort of, I mean, I still consider Garry and I as quite early adopters, nowhere near on your scale, but we're still quite early adopters. And, for us, we'll get an app out and plan to go, oh, well, if I just nip 3 miles off the motorway, I can get to this charger. And if that one's not working, there's one just half a mile up the road I can use, etc., etc. But what we need is what's behind Garry, really. And you're going to play a big part in that, I think. Like you say, it can't be a one company solution. It needs multiple players, but you're definitely headed in the right direction, I think.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Yeah, it's an exciting place to be. And as you say, having been driving an EV, I mean, when I first started using public charging infrastructure, there were 2 chargers in London. And the same problem occurred then when every day I could turn up and charge no problem. But then one day, this G-Whiz that wasn't mine was arriving before me, and I was like, well, that's me scuppered because I can't get home now. And I had to go back and hope at lunchtime that he'd moved or she'd moved, so that I could charge. And that was just a simple case of demand outstripping supply. And whether you're looking at 2 people and 1 charger or 20,000 people and 20,000 chargers, it's the same principle, right? So we just got to, but we've all got to contribute to provide a solution long into the future. And this is only the first stage, but it's a very, very important one.
So what are your plans in terms of the electric highway? We'll stick with that one just for the moment. What are your plans in terms of how quickly do you foresee the upgrades happening across the network to either chargers or adding multiple chargers to sites?
I can't give you too much detail away, I'm afraid, but I think that we've already stated that the intention is to upgrade, i.e. swap out existing chargers with new ones by the end of the year. A number of those as well we want to look at improving upon to get to the sort of level that is akin to the rugby one in the background to Garry. And then beyond that, it's a case of continually upgrading thereafter, and that gets a bit more complicated, as I said before, around grid connections, etc. But much like our first forecourt, and we've got another 4 or 5 to complete by the end of this year of those as well. So we're going to be very, very busy putting this together. But it needs to be done. It just needs to be done.
It sounds like you can be incredibly busy. Just to throw into this mix, because I know certainly something with iPace drivers will be very interested in. When you say you're upgrading, this includes the sites which are currently Chatham only, doesn't it? So they'll have CCS as well.
Yes, they will. Yeah.
Brilliant, because there's multiple sites in Scotland that applies to. We've fallen quite far behind England in that sense, in that the electric highways up here, a lot of them are Chatham only.
Yeah, and there's also a few charges in the UK as well that are AC only, the Type 2 only, which also need to be improved upon as well. So, so we'll make sure we cater for everybody.
Absolutely brilliant. I mean, so you say, coming back to the forecourts, you say, did I hear you right? There's another 4 or 5 planned. Is that to be completed this year, or?
Yes.
Well,
that's ambitious, but
it is ambitious.
But I now believe you can do it.
Exactly.
Yes.
I can't doubt you again now, because I've had egg on my face already. So
yeah, well, you can doubt me all you like, because I'm not the operations CEO. So they're the guys that are really driving it forward. I'm just talking about it for their benefit, really. But I mean, all those sites, we've got different slight variants of the traditional. We've only got one, the Braintree, but 1 or 2 of those will have solar adjacent to them, so that we can actually private wire the energy straight from the sun directly into our own batteries on site. And then in certain sites where we're the Braintree one, for example, is about 2.5 acres, and we don't always have that much space to play with. So so I think it's the Norwich site, which is going to be actually built on stilts. So a lot of the charging is beneath the building, and then the whole retail element is on the first floor only, purely because we've got a smaller area to operate within. But we want to try and ensure that we get the same amount of facilities that Braintree has offered, but also deliver that everywhere else. So the only way to do that on space constrained sites is to stack it this way rather than that way. So they all look very, very, very similar, but they've all got their own slight styling differences and functional differences because of that.
But there's your rain protection for you, Gary.
Yeah. I'm always going on about covering of charges.
Yes. Well, obviously our roof at Braintree has two functions. It keeps you away from the rain, but also is a 200 kilowatt peak solar array as well. And I think we said last time, Gary, that there is a different consideration to do at the services, and I can't make any promises we're going to provide cover just yet. Because that's not on the priority list, if I'm brutally honest. But I think we said last time as well, it's not just about the covers in these places, but about disabled access, family access, access for vans, access for buses and lorries, all that kind of stuff. We've got to really, we're really thinking about in the background, because these are all the other variants and variables that will come to the fore in the fullness of time. The priority and the focus is on delivering the charging that we can, but we're also very cognizant of those other variables which are just as important.
Yeah, I mean, one thing which I think probably doesn't get talked about enough, but I got quite involved recently actually with an exchange on Twitter with a young woman called Kate Tyrrell, who you might have heard of, and a few other people chipped in. But it turned out it became apparent that there's a definite issue with women traveling alone on public chargers. And Kate recounted a tale to me of, it was either her first public charging experience or an early public charging experience, but she was traveling at night, used whichever app she'd used to find a charger, and it took her to some dodgy charger at the back end of a car park in an unlit corner by an industrial estate kind of. But she basically recounted the story of how she sat in her car for the whole charging session crying. I hope she doesn't mind me saying that. And quite a few other women chipped in and said they'd had very similar experiences. Now, I don't know if it was ever at the forefront of your mind when planning these things, but this, between the motorway sites and the forecourts, seems like an ideal solution to that particular problem.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I do know Kate very well. In fact, I've got one of my energy chargers behind me on the shoulder.
Yes.
So I'm sporting a Zappy charger on my left shoulder. But yeah, I mean, her and Jordan, of course, the CEO, and Sarah Sloman from Obtronics, and these are big lady influencers, female influencers, and big players in our industry that that have all expressed concerns like this at different times. So. It's another flavour, which you're quite right. These things need to be well lit, and people need to feel safe. Yeah. And being stuck in a charger in the back of a car park or the back of a town hall at night when there's no one around is just not pleasant for anybody. And yeah, it is a concern. So sites like this, definitely help to sort that out for sure. But yeah, it's a very fine point.
Yeah, and you make a good point about accessibility as well, because it is something that's, I wouldn't say it's been overlooked up till now, but there are quite a lot of charging sites where you do kind of think, oh, I wouldn't like to have to do this, if I wasn't fully,
Yeah, I mean, I had a really good, not really good, but I had an experience that yesterday. Actually, I was parked in one of the Instabulk chargers, which they tend to have quite narrow slots, parking slots, because they're just using the planning allowances for parking and that's, I can't remember what date that was set up, but the actual width of the parking spaces is defined in that planning law, and it's very tight. And I actually had to back my car out so the lady next to me could get her children out the car, because there's no way she could have got them out in those slots. And that to me is, I mean, you've done a brilliant job with that in the spacing you've got around both, certainly at the forecourt is amazing, and also rugby is a lot easier, though still on one side it could be a bit of a challenge to get out on some of those slots. But it's definitely something which really does need addressing.
Yeah, it's another tricky one. That I don't know whether people really appreciate this or not, but the charging flaps on EVs can be in multiple different places. So they're very popular front middle, back left, back right, front left, front right. So trying to get the positioning for chargers is quite problematic. I've had many an instance when I had an i3, of trying to access chargers in London, and it's just physically impossible because the charger's nowhere near. It's great for a taxi front middle, but no good for a BMW with flat back right.
Yeah.
So there's quite a lot of challenges there around reversing and reversing or driving as is in the rugby layout. At Braintree, we're lay-by-esque, if you like, for want of a better expression, where you park side to the charger, which in some instances is great, but you have to pick your side. It's sort of a bit like you do at a petrol station. So there's a bit of rock and a hard place in terms of this sort of layout, in terms of trying to get it right. And of course, in the future, the parking to the side element is going to be useful for lorries and buses, etc. So we've got a dedicated commercial lane at Braintree. It's not got any chargers in it yet, but it's been designed such that we can facilitate that in the future, so that we can get things like lorries and buses in there. Otherwise, in a reversing driving logic, that wouldn't happen. So there's all sorts of different accessibility, charging point locations, the thickness of the cables. These big 350 kilowatt water cooled cables, they're heavy too. And if you've got an MG, for example, which I hate to name drop, but maybe I should have said it. I've done it now. But the charging flap underneath is quite awkward. If you've got a very, very heavy cable and you're trying to get it underneath the front, so there's all sorts of different considerations like that we have to try and take into thought and try and provide a solution for.
Yeah, I mean, I had it recently. I had a 175 kilowatt charging station down south, and the cables, it was the big water cooled cables, and even in the I-Pace, it was quite a struggle to get that cable, because you're trying to kind of bend it round as well.
Yeah.
And that was one of those times where I thought, "Ooh, this could be easier."
Yeah.
But I mean, I think the lay-by parking certainly seems like a brilliant idea. Obviously, not every site's going to be capable of having that. It's with the forecourts, you've got the benefit of the space to put that in, but it certainly would seem to me to be a brilliant concept where it's feasible to do it, because it allows for everything, including towing.
I think it does, as long as you've got a number of chargers. I think we're not necessarily wedded to the idea. It depends on, as you say quite rightly, the amount of space we've got available. But having 24 chargers under the solar canopy means that, at least for the time being, the likelihood of finding one on the right side to your car is pretty high.
Yeah.
As that gets busier, that might be more of a consideration. We are looking at longer cables as well to try and help with some of that accessibility. So for the time being it works, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's what we'll do forever, because we've got to try and find the best solution, and maybe it's a bit of both. I don't know. I mean, the AC chargers we've got on our Braintree are drive-in or reverse-in, so whereas everything else, so are the Teslas in fact, but or the 24 under the canopy are side-on. So we've actually got a pretty split mix anyway.
Okay. Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. We're learning all the time.
Well, that's the thing, is that I guess staying flexible is key here, because you're effectively breaking new ground in many ways, because it is a facility that's just never existed really in this country, and to be honest, I've not seen anything like it anywhere, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I think if we were to jump over to China, I expect we'd probably find some stuff like that somewhere, and probably 100 times the size. But I think everywhere else it's probably reasonably unique at the moment. It certainly is, in the UK and perhaps Europe as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be foolish to not discuss pricing as well during this, because what I don't know if our viewers are going to be aware of this or not, but not only are you providing these sort of one at the moment, but many more coming, these sort of state-of-the-art charging facilities, but just remind me how much you charge per kilowatt hour.
A meager 24 pence a kilowatt hour at the forecourts, and 30 pence a kilowatt hour at services. So I mean,
that is that's got to be outside of the government subsidised Charge Place Scotland network. That's got to be some of the cheapest rapid charging in Britain, hasn't it?
I believe so.
Without a subscription.
Without a subscription, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, we will bring in the subscription models in the fullness of time, but for the foreseeable, that's the rate that we're offering, and not just cheap. No, it's not cheap, but it's whatever you perceive it to be. But that we are very competitive in the marketplace. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
But similarly, you can charge with a contactless payment anywhere as well. So you don't have to be a member. You don't need an app. You don't need an RFID card. You can just turn up with any debit or credit card at any of our locations, and that again is probably equally as valuable as the pence per kilowatt hour rate. I would have thought, just for the when we want to harbour loyalty, we want to have members, we want people to use our app, we want all the same stuff that every other commercial enterprise does. And if there is a justifiable reason to do so because you're a regular user of our facilities, then you would probably think that was a worthwhile exercise to undertake. But if you're just turning up because you happen to be going on holiday and you can just pay on your debit and credit card, then that's the seamless and painless way of doing it, and obviously at a very attractive rate as well. So that again is part of the journey, our journey, and anybody else's journey is to make that as easy as possible.
I remember one of the other things you said to me, Sam, the other day was about the reliability as well. That's such a critical thing as well. And I think one of the huge advantages you've got is with the forecourts is they're manned with people who actually understand EV charging.
Yeah, that is important, and they are manned. We can't man everything. Obviously, the highway won't be quite the same, but we're learning all of the time. And I think what I've certainly discovered I might have been driving for nearly 20 years in an EV, but I certainly didn't know the technicalities of what goes on when you plug something in. The handshakes and the communication is really, really quite something. And there's all sorts of different protocols that are in the background, and different cars talk in different languages, and they can sometimes change from one language to another as well. And a lot of the time when a charger isn't working, it's actually probably not because the car's not communicating properly with the charger, rather than the instinctive thought process that it's the other way around. So there's all sorts of different communication type protocol that we're understanding all the time. And even with things like the iPace, we've been at the very early days, we had a few different trips for whatever reason, and not trips, but failed charges for whatever reason. And because we're there, we can dig into the data and say, well, we know it was that car at that time on that charger, and it was that version of car. In fact, we know that anyway from the MAC address when we plugged something in. But then we can diagnose it and find out why, go back to ABB and talk to them about it and understand what the reasoning was. Was it a protocol issue? Was it a firmware issue with the vehicle? So that we can learn. So we in the background, we're learning all the time. Every time a new car comes out, we come and have it charged at our site. We had the Ioniq 5 there the other day. We were giving that a go. So we can understand how it behaves on our chargers, so we can learn. And that's part of the reliability. It's not just about what you physically see when you plug it in, but it's about all that electronics. And there's so many different handshakes with the contactless device, with the servers, with our back-end software providers, there's a myriad of things that have to happen in a split second. And we're trying to learn all of that all the time to make sure that we keep things going and keep things charging for as long as possible. But we're not perfect either. There will be faults. There will have things that trip us up every now and again. But as you say, we've got choice. So if we do have a problem with one charger for whatever reason, then the default is to park about 20 yards further down and you crack on, rather than having to travel 20 miles down the road to find an alternative. So we're doing the best we can.
I also think that engagement you've got there with actually seeing the problems, analysing them, is going to actually improve charging for everybody. I think because you're going to be able to feed that back to the manufacturers, get like ABB, and actually get them to put fixes out there, which will probably percolate to the rest of their chargers as well.
Yeah, it's all learning, isn't it? We're all learning. Every day is a school day, and we're no different. We're doing the best we can, but everybody's learning. We're learning. We're not perfect. We'll make mistakes. We'll fix them. And like everybody else, we'll do the best that we can. But we certainly want to create as a reliable system as we can from day one. And if Braintree, you've only got my word for this, but if Braintree has anything to go by, then reliability's been pretty strong. So we're pretty happy.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of there's been a lot of public posts and videos and things done at Braintree, and now Rugby is very popular for it as well. People are desperate to go just to try it, I think. But I can't think of having seen one person say they had a problem, which actually, that's how it should be, but it feels like quite an achievement somehow.
Yeah, well, that's great. It's great to hear. Like I said, we're not perfect, but I think our success rate of charging is extremely high. So long may that continue. But yeah, it's like I said, learning curve for us all. But we'll keep delivering that reputation, hopefully, for many years to come.
Yeah, well, let's hope so, because it's been it's been an eye opener for me to see what's actually possible in terms of infrastructure. The sorts of connections that you have at Braintree, that how many megawatts did you say?
We've got 5 megawatt grid connection and 6
Yeah,
megawatt
things like that. That's the kind of stuff that just a short time ago people were saying, well, that's just not possible. You can't do that. You can't have that kind of power going into one site. The grid will fall over, etc., etc. We've all heard it.
Yeah.
But it's just unbelievable to see. A 200 kilowatt solar array on a canopy, even that blows my mind, in all honesty.
Yeah, that keeps the lights on in the building, so that's great. Yeah. Even that, that's powering the site, which is great. It doesn't necessarily contribute a tremendous amount to the vehicles, actually, because the site itself needs a lot of that energy to run. But that doesn't matter, whether if that's the generation of energy for the building and the rest for the charging is coming from the solar farm down the road, then that's just fine. Providing we are net zero, that's the important thing.
Yeah, that's so we hadn't covered the fact you are net zero and all, because that's always been one of the things which is always come every time we talk about electric cars. Oh, but the car, they're not clean because the source of the energy is not clean. But in your case, they definitely are.
Well, yeah, no, it has to be, doesn't it? And we're literally taking energy out of the sun, so I don't know what's cleaner than that. But similarly, even with the vehicles themselves, I haven't even touched on this, and I perhaps should have done, especially given my Chief Vehicle Officer title. But we lease vehicles as well, and obviously they're all electric. We do that through our partners Hitachi, and so we have various personal and contract hire options for leasing vehicles. But not only that, if you were to lease a vehicle through us, we plant 100 trees for every vehicle that is sold through us as well. Or is leased through us, I should say. And the reason why we do that is to mitigate as much of, if not all of, the carbon emissions during the production of that vehicle. So whilst we don't actually need to do that, because that's not the making of the vehicles, is not something we can control, we still want to contribute towards it. And in some cases, for certain OEMs that are already net zero, we're actually creating a carbon negative approach by virtue of planting those trees. So we're really covering it all off. So I can myth bust everything in one sentence in terms of the energy generation all the way through to the production of the vehicles themselves. Because if we cover end to end, then there is no dispute.
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of approach again is quite innovative, and it's very innovative. But it's very nice to see companies actually taking a holistic approach and actually thinking about stuff like that.
And Sorry, I was just going to very briefly interrupt and say one thing on that vehicle side of things. If any of our viewers are thinking about changing their iPace, you can supply iPaces.
Yes, absolutely, we can, and please do come to us. It's there's plenty of places to lease vehicles from, but none greener than us. So if you have an ounce of sustainability in your body, then please do give us a look, because which I'm sure most, if not all, of your listeners and viewers do, because they're driving electric vehicles. So, but yeah, please at least give us a look, because we're definitely doing it the right way.
Do you have any kind of sort of national delivery service, or is it local customers only for the moment?
We're national, even though we have one forecourt, and obviously we've got the highway network now. We're upgrading, so we can supply vehicles to anybody, anywhere. In that sense, we are largely similar to that of a traditional leasing agent that goes through the same supply chain. So we can supply and deliver vehicles anywhere in the country. But I think we're the only ones that plant 100 trees for the benefit, as well as everything else. And we have energy included packages as well, of course. So as in the future, the leasing opportunity will also have an energy included option. Well, it already does, in fact, such that you can lease a vehicle and the facilities like the one behind Garry can you just plug in and use it without doing anything at all, because it's all included in the lease.
No, that's brilliant. To be honest, that is a really, really good benefit. I presume there's different packages for how many kilowatt hours per month or something like that, is there?
Yeah, it's all calculated. We do a calculation on the background based on the vehicle's battery size, the amount of miles put on the lease that you've committed to, for 10,000 miles a year, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So we look at the efficiency, we look at the mileage. That gives us a kilowatt hour consumption over the duration of the lease. And then we recalculate it back into a financial value, which then falls back into the lease cost alongside the vehicle. So it's all factored in based on the vehicle that you're driving, and yeah, that's it really.
And that would be usable at your forecourts and your motorway sites.
Absolutely, yes.
Oh, brilliant! That is a really useful benefit, because it's just one extra hassle taken away from people, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, my only caveat to that is that it's accessible to all the ones that we've upgraded. So by the end of this year, it will cover everything. But the Ecotricity network will run concurrently to ours until such time as the system is upgraded. So, but blink and it will all be done, I hope.
Yeah, I must admit, I remember having this conversation with someone 6 months ago about your energy included, and they said, "But that's not like it used to be. I don't live anywhere near Braintree," but now that's definitely not the case at all.
Well, no, you're absolutely right, and we've had lots of people local to Braintree who've taken it up. That are driving past every day to commute, and then therefore, stopping off in the morning or the evening and smashing in 150, 200 miles whilst grabbing a coffee is attractive proposition. But we wanted to demonstrate the art of the possible as far as that is concerned, and target that option locally, because that's where our first forecourt was. But as that network grows out, so too does that product that applies everywhere. And of course, as you say, it's been dramatically accelerated by virtue of the partnership with the highway, which is reasonably new. So that opens that door and that possibility quite a bit quicker than we were expecting it to.
So if someone does do your energy included subscription, how does that actually work? Do they get a card, or is it plug and charge? Or
yeah, so to begin with, it's simply an RFID card that you would scan at the charger, and that will just give you access. We know where that card is assigned to you, and it's there for you to use as much as you wish throughout the duration of that charging cycle, that charging experience, for as long as you've got the vehicle for. So it's as simple as that. Welcome pack. We deliver your car and we deliver your welcome pack, and inside that welcome pack is a little dark green card which gives you that access.
Brilliant.
Excellent. I have to consider that one. It might change my cars.
Please do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great to see that multi-pronged approach. Again, it's not any one thing. It's just sort of embracing the whole electrification process, from test driving your car to leasing your car to filling your car up with electrons to going the length and breadth of the country in it. So yeah. It's one of those things that in years to come, people will go, well, yeah, of course they thought of that. But for now, it's truly when you think about it, you think, yeah, that makes total sense. But at some point, you had to think about it.
Yeah, we do, and we're thinking about it all the time. That means there's an awful lot of moving parts within our business. There's an awful lot of different departments that are running and running concurrently, and obviously overlapping a lot of the time. So with that many components and product offerings, there's an awful lot to consider. But at the same time, there's a serious economic reasoning for it. We've spent a lot of money building this stuff out, and we're not going to make all of that back on 24 pence a kilowatt hour. So it's incredibly important that we generate as number of different revenue stacks as possible. That as a business case, if we've got trading with the grid, we're selling cars, we're providing energy, we're selling coffees, we're doing event space and vehicle launches and all that kind of stuff. You add all of those things together as a multiple revenue stacks on top of each other. With a bit of luck, it's a business case that works. Because if we did one of these things in isolation, then we probably wouldn't have got it off the ground, because the business case wouldn't have been there from the outset. And people like Hitachi, who are now 20% shareholders in our business, they wouldn't have backed us. So it's great to provide these things, and we hope we've thought of quite a lot of things, but there is a serious business case behind it, which justifies the end, hopefully.
Yeah, no, I think from the beginnings that we've seen so far, I'm quite excited to see the next part of the journey, to be honest, because I think it's going to be hugely exciting for EV drivers in particular.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
And iPace drivers specifically, because we can get CCS chargers that work with our car.
Yeah. Well, I've never had an iPace, I'm afraid. I feel your pain with my my i3 that I drove around London and beyond for many years. And, it's the same sort of Chalamo concern.
Indeed.
Sorry, Chalamo CCS concern. God, even I'm getting it mixed up now. Yeah. But yeah, we'll fix all of that. We'll definitely fix that.
I think there's a lot of iPace drivers saying thank you very much, because that is
indeed.
It's definitely been the last, so particularly, I mean, the last couple of years we've both been driving the motorway services have, as I said the other day to you, have deteriorated, and it's become a real problem for. Not for, I mean, as Alex says, it's not such an issue for people who can plan a bit and are prepared to plan a bit, absolutely doctors, but for people who are just going to get in the car and drive, and there's a lot more of those people coming along now, and they just want to go to the services, and you're going to solve that problem. So thank you again for that.
Yeah, and again with the contactless thing, like one of my sort of benchmarks that I always apply to these things is if we're going to have 100% adoption of EVs, which is where we're headed, my parents need to be able to charge a car up. My parents don't have a smartphone. My parents wouldn't be interested in having apps and logons and passwords. They have debit cards. So the whole approach of contactless payment and making it simple is so important going forwards. I mean, it's apps are fine for youngsters like Gary and myself, but
yeah.
But realistically, there are people out there, and there are also chargers in locations that don't have data signals. So anything that gets around that as a potential roadblock is well worthwhile.
Yeah, well, I don't know how good the resolution is of the screen of your viewers that are watching, but above Gary's head is a 1, 2, and a 3, and that is plug your vehicle in, tap your contactless card.
Yeah.
And the third one is press the X to stop. That's it.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. That's it. And it's there in plain sight, including the price per kilowatt hour as well. So that's the simplicity that is required to help your parents and many other people. It's not just the older generation either. It's the people that are just starting. The new guys. The guys that work for me that have only just got their first EV recently and are still sort of working out how to practically charge these things and how it works in the real world. So every generation it just needs to be simple, no matter how old you are.
Exactly. I mean, as Gary's favourite subject, when it's pouring with rain and you're standing outside plugging your car in, the last thing I want to be doing is messing around with plugs and phones and apps, and I want to plug my car in, wave something vaguely in the direction of the charger and get undercover.
Yeah.
So it's I'm not having a go at my elderly parents. But yeah, I mean, as you say, there's all sorts of groups that well, everybody wants simplicity. I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, the current smartphone companies have made a fortune out of that concept. But so where do you see? I mean, obviously, the next step is the motorway services, the extra forecourts. But are there any sort of longer term plans, moves abroad, or anything like that? Or for now, is that the focus?
I think there's another flavour which are the sort of hub style size, which hub in the sense that we're looking at locations that are 6 to 12 DCs, not too dissimilar from Rugby actually, but not on the service station network. So we've got 3 fundamental layers that we want to try and isolate and locate sites for. Some of them are obviously pre-existing, such as the services. We've got locked down pretty much where our forecourts are going to go, and then there's the hub network again, which wants to fill in the gaps. So like I said before, we're not going to do it on our own, but at least if we've got a map of the country and you've got the 85% of the service station. We've got that covered. Will be a lovely spread of forecourts around over the top of that, and then where all the gaps are, there'll be the hub network. So we've certainly got that on the agenda as well. Probably more for the latter for next year than this year, but all the planning is happening now. So we want to continue to provide that solution, but it needs to be multiple high-powered DC, not one or two here or there. It needs to be a proper number. And then as far as further afield is concerned, that's a conversation for another day. But obviously there's lots of different appetites out there in different parts of the world for what we're doing over here in the UK. So we'll see what happens in that regard.
Well, I mean, it's I can understand why they'd be looking at it with envious eyes, shall we say? But yeah, I think more power to you. It's we've already seen just a teaser of the benefits that are to come, and certainly from an EV driver's perspective, this is what we need. And it's what I like is, rather than building to the capacity we need now, it's building more to the capacity that we need in a couple of years from now or more, rather than constantly be in the game of catch up that we've kind of got trapped into.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I joined Gridserve a year or so or two ago, because of that forward thinking. Because there's been an awful lot of stuff that's gone in the ground to plug a gap, and it's just a leaky bucket. We just keep filling up, and the infrastructure we're building now is not going to support what we need in 10 years' time, but at least it's going to support what we need for a number of years to come, and then we can keep upgrading on that and keep ahead of the game, right? That's really, really important, because as I often say on these things, we are at 99% of the registered vehicles on the road today are not battery electric. So that's a 99% target that we're going after, but that's 99% of the vehicles on the road that we're going to have to be electric in the next 10, 15, 20 years. So that needs to be seriously considered. So that's something we're very, very cognizant of, that we need to try and deliver something for the future. But like I said, not going to do it on our own. Everybody else needs to step up and help along that journey for sure.
Exactly.
Well, I certainly wish you a world of good fortune in doing this, Sam, because it's so important to get this done. And as I said, we're all really grateful for what you're doing, and looking forward to coming and visit.
It's an absolute pleasure to talk about it. I feel almost guilty, because I'm the one that has to answer the questions and gets interviewed on these things. But the team that goes on in the background that's doing all the proper hard work is unbelievable. There's an engine in the background, so to speak. Probably a terrible example, terrible word to use.
A motor in the background.
There's a machine. There's a motor. There's a motor whirring away in the background. That is doing tremendous amounts of work, and we're incredibly proud of them for doing that.
You should be indeed. So if anybody wants to find out more information about Gridserve, you've got a website, which I think is pretty impressive. And you told me the other day you're going to be adding lots of information and stuff to it as well fairly shortly. So that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it's a vast website already. We've got all sorts of different parts of the business, whether it be solar or remote power or charging infrastructure or vehicles. So already it's quite a big site in terms of data and information. And we will be we're continually improving, specifically the EV solutions part, the electric vehicle part as well. So we've developed all sorts of guides and frequently asked questions and thousands of words of material that we will put on the website that gives people a ready access to some of the terminology. What is a kilowatt hour and a kilowatt? What is a CCS and a CHAdeMO? What does a charging curve mean? What is type 1, type 2? All this stuff that the three of us probably are very familiar with and don't even think about. To the 99%, they'll listen to that phraseology and go, what? So we've got to help with that education piece as well. So it's an inform and educate as well as sell, because that's equally important, because without that education and putting people in the right comfort zone to make the leap, they're not going to make the leap. So we're forever updating the way in which we deal with our website as well. But as it stands, yes, there's a lot of information on there already, and it will continually improve.
Brilliant. Well, thanks again for your time, Sam. It's been absolutely brilliant. So hopefully people will learn a lot from that, and obviously we'll get questions, so we'll sling them in your direction, and I'm sure you'll answer them for us.
Yeah, very happy to do that.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show.
And we'll have to get together when Alex is allowed to travel down from up north. We'll have to actually come and record a show at one of your sites.
Definitely.
Well, you're most welcome, and you'll be one of hundreds by that point that have done so, I think. So
yeah.
So yeah, I've stopped logging all the places I've seen us now, because it's on the front of Top Gear magazine even. So it's like everywhere, which is fantastic to see.
I may even get on a bike.
Yeah, there you go.
But not for an hour.
No, I wouldn't recommend it. Especially when you're talking at the same time. That makes it really tough. But
yeah.
That sounds a challenge. Brilliant. Well, again, thank you, Sam, for joining us, and we'll be back sometime soon, I guess, Alex.
Indeed. I don't know what our next subject's going to be. Oh, actually, we do know what our next subject's going to be, but let's save that for another day.
Cheers all. Thanks very much.
Great.
Thanks
everyone.
Cheers.
Abba-dabby dude.